Oh, yes. Well, if he thinks Carl's his mother, it more or less follows, doesn't it? They may not be brilliant, but they're logical. He's quite convinced he's human. He completely ignores the other Kestrels, hasn't got time for them. They're just a bunch of birds as far as he's concerned. But when Carl walks in here, he goes completely berserk. There's a problem, of course, because you can't introduce an imprinted bird into the wild. It wouldn't know what the hell to do. Wouldn't nest, wouldn't hunt. It would just expect to go to restaurants and stuff. Or at least it would expect to be fed. It wouldn't survive by itself. However, he does have a very important function in the aviary. You see, the young birds that we've hatched here don't come to sexual maturity at the same time. So when the females start getting sexy, the males are not ready to handle it. The females are bigger and more belligerent and often beat the males up. So when that happens, we collect semen from Pink and... How do you do that? Asked Mark. In a hat. I thought you said in a hat. That's right. Carl puts on this special hat, which is a bit like a rather strange bowler hat with a rubber rim. Pink goes mad with the desire for Carl, flies down and fucks the hell out of his hat. What? He ejaculates into the brim. We collect the drop of semen and use it to inseminate a female. Strange way to treat your mother. He's a strange bird, but he does serve as a useful purpose in spite of being psychologically twisted. Setting up the captive breeding centre on Mauritius is one of Carl's major failures. In fact, it is the result of probably the most spectacular and brilliant failure of his life. They always thought I'd be a failure when I was a boy, he told us when he turned up later, incredibly late for something. I was hopeless, a complete write-off, never did any work, wasn't interested in anything at all. Well, anything other than animals. Nobody at my school in Wales thought it was very useful being only interested in animals, but I had about 50 of them, to my father's despair, in cages all over the backyard. Badgers and foxes, wild Welsh polecats, owls, hawks, macaws, jackdaws, everything. I even managed, just as a schoolboy, to breed kestrels in captivity. My headmaster said it was nice that I had an interest, but I would never get anywhere because I was a lousy scholar. One day he called me into his study and said, "Jones," he said, "this just isn't acceptable. You spend your whole life going around looking under hedges. You spend no time doing your schoolwork. You're a failure. What are you going to do with yourself?" I said, and remember, this is in Wales, "Sir, I want to go to tropical islands and study birds." He said, "But to do that you have to be either rich or intelligent, and you're neither." I took this as some kind of encouragement, finally managed to pass a few exams, went to college, and when I was an undergraduate I went to a lecture in Oxford by Professor Tom Cade, who's a world authority on falcons. He told us how in America they were working with peregrine falcons by breeding them in captivity and releasing the young back into the wild. I couldn't believe it. This was incredibly exciting. Here were these people going out and actually doing something. Then he said that in the Indian Ocean, on an island called Mauritius, there was a very rare bird, perhaps the rarest of all falcons, called the Mauritius kestrel, which was at the moment doomed to extinction, but that it could possibly be saved by captive breeding. And it suddenly came to me that all this work I've been doing in my backyard as a kid, fiddling around with birds, could actually be used to save a whole species from becoming extinct. I was overwhelmed by excitement, and I thought, Christ, I must see if I can do something about this. So in the summer I went to America and studied a number of the projects there, saw how they were doing it, and promised myself that if I possibly could, I'd go to Mauritius and work to save the Mauritius kestrel. And they said, "Well, Carl, it's all very well you're wanting to go to Mauritius, but there's lots of problems out there and you can't save these birds, so just aren't enough of them. There's one breeding pair and a couple of other individuals, and with all the local problems and no facilities, it just can't be done. There's a small project there, but it's got to be closed down. It's just throwing good resources after bad." But I got the job. The job was to close the project down. That was the job I came here to do 10 years ago. Close the whole thing down, what there was of it. None of this was even here then, he said, looking around at the captive breeding centre in which he had raised over 40 Mauritius kestrels for gradual reintroduction to the wild, 200 pink pigeons, and even 100 Rodrigues fruit bats. "I suppose I have to admit," he said with a naughty smile, "that I've been a complete failure." As he finished his story, his hand dropped to his knee, and he happened to catch sight of his watch. Instantly a distraught expression came into his face, and he jumped to his feet, clapping his hand to his head. He was late for a fundraising meeting. We heard him complain regularly and bitterly during our time in Mauritius that he was no good at administration or politics, and yet to keep his work going he had to spend an awful lot of time doing both. He had constantly to work raising money, justifying and accounting for the money he gets to the people he gets it from, and negotiating with the various international conservation bodies who seem to watch over his shoulder all the time. As far as he's concerned, it just prevents him from doing the work he's best able to do, and he wishes they'd leave him alone and let him get on with it, or rather give him the money and then leave him alone and let him get on with it. The whole project to save the fragile and unique ecology of Mauritius is run on a pathetically meagre budget, and money, or the lack of it, is the bane of Carl's life. He left in a harassed fluster. You'd think that everyone involved in conservation work would be on the same side, said Mark after he'd gone, but there's just as much squabbling and bureaucracy as there is in anything else. You're telling me, said Richard, and it's always the workers out in the field who get mucked about by it. Look at these rabbits. With a contemptuous wave of his hand, he showed us a cage in which a few perfectly ordinary-looking rabbits sat twitching at us. There's an island near here, said Richard, a very, very important island as far as wildlife is concerned, called Round Island. There are more unique species of plants and animals on Round Island than there are on any equivalent area on Earth. About 150 years ago, somebody had the bright idea of introducing goats and rabbits to the island, so if anybody got shipwrecked there, they'd have something to eat. The populations quickly got out of hand, and it wasn't until the mid-70s that they finally managed to get rid of the goats. Then, just a few years ago, a team from New Zealand came to exterminate the rabbits until somebody realised they were exterminating a rare breed of French rabbit that didn't exist anymore in Europe, and it should therefore be transferred to mainland Mauritius and preserved in some way, i.e. by us. As far as I'm concerned, continued Richard, we could just put them in the pot. They're just ordinary rabbits. Also, since then, someone has come along and said that's a load of rubbish, they aren't that particular variety. So we've just got to sit here feeding these rabbits until the rabbit experts have decided whether they're valuable or not. It's a waste of our time and resources. I mean, just feeding all these animals is a problem. They all need something different, and you have to work out what it is. These Rodrigues fruit bats you've come to see, we have to feed them on a mixture of fruit and powdered dog food reconstituted with milk. They used to be fed on a diet rich in banana, which did them no good at all and only gave them a nervous tic. He shrugged. I don't know what you've got against them, said Mark. I think they're great animals. Oh, I've got nothing against them, said Richard. They're great. They're just common, that's all. Mark protested. It's the rarest fruit bat in... Yeah, but there are hundreds of them, insisted Richard. Hundreds means they're severely endangered, said Mark. Do you know how many echo parakeets there are in the wild? Exclaimed Richard. 15. That's rare. Hundreds is common. When you come to Mauritius and you see things in such a last-ditch state, everything else becomes unimportant. It becomes unimportant because we are witnessing here a species which could be saved if people put their minds to it, and if it does go extinct, it will be our fault because we never got around to saving it. There's 15 of them left. We've got the kestrels up and the pigeons up purely because of the effort we've put into them, the money and the personnel. The parakeets, we're working very, very hard to save them, and if we don't manage it, they will be gone forever, and we have to worry about somebody else's rabbits. He shook his head and then calmed down. Listen, he said to Mark, you're right. The Rodrigues fruit bat is a very important animal, and we are working to protect it. It's lost a lot of its habitat because the people of Rodrigues live by subsistence farming, which means that they've done a lot of forest clearance. The bat population is so reduced that one big cyclone, and we get them here, could wipe them out. But the Rodrigans have suddenly realised this is actually damaging their own interests to cut down the forest, because it's reducing their water supply. If they want to preserve their watersheds, they have to preserve the forests, which means the bats get somewhere to live. So they're in with a chance. By the world standards, they're severely endangered, but by the standards of these islands, where every indigenous species is endangered, they're doing fine. He grinned. Want to see some endangered mice? He said. I didn't think mice were an endangered species yet, I said. I didn't say anything about the species, said Richard. I just meant the particular mice. Conservation is not for the squeamish. We have to kill a lot of animals, partly to protect the species that are endangered, and partly to feed them. A lot of the birds are fed on mice, so we have to breed them here. He disappeared into a small, warm, squeaking room, and re-emerged a few seconds later, with a handful of freshly killed mice. Time to feed the birds, he said, heading back towards the Land Rover from hell.